Well, they're calling it the most significant challenge in decades in Cuba. Thousands of people joining protests against the communist government in Havana and several other cities. Analysts in Cuba say it's the biggest anti-government demonstrations in almost 3 decades. The internet was quickly shut down by the government to stop the news circulating, but videos posted on social media appeared to show people calling for greater freedoms, also complaining about the problem of higher food prices and demanding vaccines to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. There are reports of repression against some of the protesters by security forces with the use of pepper gas, truncheons and rubber bullets. And at least one person is thought to have died in the eastern city of Palma Soriano and several people injured.
Se hace todo eso para desacreditar, para desmontar.
All this is done to discredit, to dismantle, to provoke, and we came here to tell the revolutionaries of this town that here the streets belong to the revolutionaries. And here no one or counter-revolutionary is going to take the streets. And if they provoke, we, without violating their constitutional rights, will apply the revolutionary law that protects this revolution. We will confront them.
Vamos a enfrentarlo.
The people came out to express themselves freely, and they are repressing and beating them, and that is unacceptable. And we are here, and we do not allow them to beat them. We are nobody, but we are here to support them and not allow them to beat them. Homeland and life, down with the dictatorship, down with the Castros, down with the communist dogs.
Extraordinary scenes there. Well, for assessment of the situation in Cuba, I'm joined now in the studio by the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. What do you make of those scenes that you just saw there?
Well, thank you very much for inviting once again. I am always very glad to be here. But you know, for the first time, I am a little disappointed. Why? Because you show the protest against, but you didn't show the protest in favor.
Well, we showed your president to balance the...
It is true.
I mean, what is
true.
News is the fact that there were protests, the first in decades, against the government. There's always been protests in favor of the government, but this is the first time that there are protests against the government in almost 3 decades. That's what's interesting.
Let me to tell you, to be historical, it was a protest in 1994, at the time that our former leader Fidel Castro was president, and it was a very interesting one. People started just saying things against, and immediately he went there to talk to the people. They started to support him. It was a very interesting.
Yeah, but let's talk about this one.
No, I am coming to this one, of
Sure.
course. Well, it is true in some parts of the country it happens yesterday, and I have to establish, first I have to establish a few things. Once, it came at the same time, almost with the same style. Secondly, they were not only pacific protests, unfortunately, they were people who came into violence. So it seems that some kind of criminal issues came, and they were even going to churches in order to steal things. So it was not just a simple protest, it was something else linked to criminal acts, and this is something that is not acceptable in terms of social moral, I mean.
Right, but of course
thirdly,
okay, sorry, go on.
Thirdly, really, of course, there were a lot of counter-protests and not in favor of the government. Some people started just facing those who were against the government, and also in many parts of the country, they came really thousands of people in favor of the government. I can even establish that in some, if you made the calculation, there were millions demonstrating in favor of the government. So it is important. It is important to have a balance in this regard. And last but not least, it is true, and we can prove it, that in the last month it has been a lot of attempts to practice what you call normally a soft war or a soft coup against the Cuban government. The counter-revolution financed from the territory of the United States has been trying to reinforce some actions in the country. There have been some criminal acts before, and also, and very important, they are taking advantage of a very serious internal situation in terms that we are suffering COVID, and we are facing the most severe moment of the pandemic. Because of the third wave, with the most virulent expression of COVID coming to.
I don't mean to interrupt you there, but I mean you've made a number of points. I mean for the rest of the world, protests against things like that are fairly normal. In other words, people feel that they're not getting the right vaccinations or treatment for COVID-19. It's going out of control in the way they perceive it. They feel that they're suffering economic hardships, unprecedented economic hardships. I mean, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. That's the way people normally are in every part of the world. They protest against those things. So, you know, it's clear that popular discontent has surged in Cuba. That's why people have taken to the streets. And the question is, do you agree that that is what has tipped people over? Rather than making it sound as though it's a criminal element within society, people are dissatisfied. I mean, people are hungry. People are, you know, afraid.
I was coming to that point. First, it is true that we are facing problems, and I was mentioning the case of COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected the Cuban economy like everywhere all over the world, it's a fact. But in the case of Cuba, the biggest effect on the economy has not come from COVID-19. COVID-19 has reinforced the situation. But the most serious affection of the Cuban economy has been from the blockade of the United States of America.
Absolutely. I think most people would agree with that.
That cost us yearly thousands of billions of US dollars when you make the calculation. This is one point. Secondly, the blockade has been reinforced with more than 253 new measures in recent years, and all those measures has been intact till today. At the moment that people are calling for solidarity all over the world, we have been suffering the most serious sanctions that we have faced in our history. And that, of course, has created us a lot of economic problems internally. That does not mean that everything is perfect in Cuba. From our side, they can be mistakes, and there are people that are disappointed because it's true, we have a lack of enough supplies. Even food for people is a reality, and people has to queue in order to buy. But at the same time, if really the situation is to try to help Cuba, as it has been trying to be portrayed for those making propaganda behind this current situation, the reality is that the only way to help the Cuban people is to release the blockade. It's just to put an end to the blockade in order to allow Cuba to develop by itself. At the moment that we are talking, COVID-19 is a most serious moment of the pandemic.
There are more than 7,000 new cases,
yes,
and there have been over almost 50 deaths.
In the last 3-4 days, we have been having figures of more than 6,000 people, but everybody is under medical admission at the expenses of the state, fully at the expenses of the state. First. Secondly, not only those positive, even those with symptoms are also in medical admission.
Right,
under
but
the
what's happening with the
vaccine,
the Soberana dose and all the rest?
I'm coming to the vaccines immediately. Just let me to finalize saying that the lethality in Cuba is 0.62, which is less than 1. The average world is more than 2. The average in the Americas, the average is also more than 2. And in the case of Cuba, it's 0.62.
Yeah, but if you look at it,
we are handling.
Yeah, but if you look
the
at
situation
it
first, and secondly, also contingents from Henry Reef medical personnel are moving from the provinces that are less affected to the provinces that are more affected.
But obviously,
in order to make a balance to the Cuban health system.
If you measure it against the population of Cuba, vis-a-vis the population of the United States or any other country, then you can see how devastating and frightening it must be for the Cuban people, who are a reasonably small population. But let's move away from that, because we know, for example, that there is no opposition that is formally allowed in Cuba, but there are civil society organizations on the island. So when we talk about the opposition, you were talking about elements, outside elements, apparently encouraging these protests and so on. Is there an organizing group behind this, or is this just an upsurge of popular discontent? Because the people are saying they have no leaders.
No, there are people that are discontent. They are people that are unhappy for the real strong situation, very hard situation that we are facing now, and that is very unstable. And of course, those people have all the ways to communicate with the government and with the authorities in order to sort out the problems.
Yeah, but the problem is that the government isn't sorting out the problem, so they can't go complaining to the government because the government isn't offering solutions.
No. The way that we work in Cuba is that we have a lot of platforms in the country in order to discuss anything regarding national policies. This is a fact.
Yeah, but discussion isn't going to put food on the table.
That is true. That is true. To get food on the table, we need two things. We need to produce more, and at the same time, we need to not have a blockade.
Absolutely.
Suffocating us. We used to say that the blockade is also a virus. Because it also suffocates us, not only COVID-19.
It's a virus on its own.
So a very important point, it seems to me, that is necessary to clarify is not only that our government has always been very open doors, because it's a popular government and it's a structure at all levels in a very popular way. So you can approach people.
But it's also a repressive government, isn't it? It represses people who ask, who challenge it.
No. This is the Cuban government is not repressive, and most of the information that has been circulating saying that it was repression yesterday is not true. The Cuban government, of course, if there is a delinquential activity, you have to go and repress it, and police have to act. This is a fact everywhere all over the world. But at the same time, the characteristic of the Cuban government is not to be repressive. If you go straight in Cuba, you will not be policemen or military holding weapons.
Right,
so
okay.
You will not see this kind
of
let's
come back and talk
Cuba.
A bit more about this,
Absolutely.
if you don't mind staying with us. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido, about the anti-government protests that have broken out in cities across Cuba. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, if you've been watching Arise News, you might have heard that thousands of Cubans have joined the biggest protests for decades against the island's communist governments. They marched in cities, including the capital Havana, shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Images on social media showed what appear to be security forces detaining and beating some of the protesters. Cubans have been angered by the collapse of the economy, as well as by restrictions on civil liberties and the handling of the pandemic. The protesters were demanding a faster coronavirus vaccination program after Cuba reported a record of nearly 7,000 daily infections and 47 deaths on Sunday. And the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido, is still with me in the studio. Thank you, Ambassador, for staying with us. Cuba, of course, heavily dependent on tourism. And I understand that the income this year for the first 6 months was about 11% down on last year. So the country is basically on its knees.
Not. We are in a serious economic situation, but we are not on our knees. First.
Well, that's just a way of speaking.
Secondly,
obviously.
let me to clarify that none of the figures that you have given has been confirmed. So it's just a speculation from.
You mean the
media.
number of people who've been infected?
No. You are talking number of people infected.
Yeah.
By,
what figures are you talking about?
I am talking about the figures of the demonstration.
Right. You mean that thousands of people?
Yeah. That figures are not confirmed.
Well, if you look at the picture behind you, that tells you, doesn't it? It stretches all the way back.
But can you affirm that this picture is from people against or people in favor of the government?
These are people most definitely against the government, and it happened
but I was asking
cities.
you that.
I mean, take a look at the pictures.
Yes,
on the screen.
no. I have seen a lot of image, And I also have a lot of image. I can provide you a lot of image in favor
Right,
of the
but
government.
let's not quibble about the
yesterday.
numbers, as we said.
So, no,
I mean,
what I want to say is that always is very important to have a balance in the information.
Yeah,
so
no, of course.
What came in against the government and what came in favor of the government, that is very important. It is true, as you were asking me, that the economic situation is serious, and of course they are, as I mentioned before, they are people that are not happy with the current situation, because the situation is serious. We are not denying that. We have never denied that.
Yeah.
But the issue is that this demonstration has been first very manipulated. Secondly, it has been induced in many parts, and they have taken advantage of some kind of discontent, some people that are suffering because of the combination, as I said before, of COVID-19, the effects of the pandemic, and also the blockade.
Right, okay, well, let me move it to another direction. And the government is so far, the Cuban government, blaming US interference, whether it's nefarious, whether it's through the direct application of sanctions and so on. I mean, there's no question that the Cuban government has a point, because everybody knows, I mean, just recently the United Nations General Assembly voted again for those sanctions to be lifted. A great deal of the problems have been caused by the sanctions imposed by Donald Trump that have continued under the Biden administration. That's a fact.
Absolutely.
So the point really is, I suppose what the people are calling for is some kind of sense that the government is moving away from its hardline position, hardline political position, and beginning to recognize that, yeah, people are going through a difficult time, and perhaps it's time for us to make some concessions with the American government, to say, we're going to allow these freedoms, we're going to do this and that. In return, can you do something about this for us?
Well, as is well known, our government has never denied the possibility to have a discussion in equal position with the government of the United States. But
what are you prepared to offer as a way of getting the Americans to lift the sanctions on Cuba?
No. Look, we have been under sanctions because we have decided to have our own future and to build our own political behavior and to have our own framework to do things. And this is a freedom, this is a liberty, this is a right that every country has. So the point is not, it seems to me, how many concessions we are ready to do. The point is that the blockade is illegal, the blockade is unfair, the blockade is criminal, violate all international law. So the only fair issue here is just to release the blockade, to put an end to this criminal policy, which is a real genocide against the Cuban people, and not to be, from the side of the American government, to be asking us for political, so-called political concessions, because we are not telling them what they have to do in their own country. We are not asking them to sit down with us to do this change or that change. Every country all over the world has the right to create its own future through the decision of their own population. And of course, internally in Cuba, we are always being ready to discuss whatever is needed in order to solve Cuban problems by Cubans. But we are never going to accept is to be imposed by a foreign power to decide what we are going to do, what we are going to do in Cuba.
Right,
and even I can tell you that we have proven several proofs during recent months how much money has been entering to finance some of those people that today are doing those kind of protests. And a person paid by a foreign government is a mercenary.
Right, but don't these protests suggest that there is popular discontent in Cuba, that people are not happy with the status quo? They're calling down with the dictatorship. It's not just about we're hungry and we need food, or the coronavirus, what you're doing is not working. They're saying down with the dictatorship. They're calling for more freedoms. And if there are thousands of people, and you can dispute those figures, going out in a population that's not that large, braving the fear of potential repression, that suggests that, you know, people are desperately unhappy in Cuba, and perhaps it's time that you make internal concessions to those people.
Then how do you explain that figures larger than those came also yesterday to support the government and to reaffirm the political will of the majority of the Cubans, and to call first to not get mercenary involvement in politics, secondly to support what the government is doing in terms of the handle of the pandemic, thirdly to denounce the criminal blockade, fourthly to support and to call in favor of our president. So it means that you have two camps.
Right.
A minority one trying to do things, and as I said before, not only political protests, but also criminal issues that unfortunately happened yesterday, because to assault a store is a criminal issue.
But of course, in every society, the way that you handle your minorities is the way that you assess how justice works in that society.
No doubt.
So assuming these people are minorities, what are you going to do to take into account their grievances?
We are ready to discuss with everybody, even why the president went yesterday to one of the places who the situation was created.
Yeah, but you heard the president there. What he was saying was that, you know, you're not going to essentially be allowed to protest, that if you go ahead and do that, that they're going to do everything they can to stop it.
If you do criminal sins, of course, the weight of the law has to be developed. But the president went there. He spoke to many people. He spoke even to people that were in the protest, and he was listening to them, and he was having a discussion to them.
Right.
So he went himself. Even to other parts of the country went other of the part of the leadership, but the president himself, he was on the streets talking to people, and not with the people, only with the people demonstrating in favor, also with people demonstrating against. What does it mean? That the president himself wanted to have his own opinion what was going on.
Okay, well,
and he said in a very calm and balanced
We've got
way.
about 20 seconds or so. Do you expect these protests to carry on, or do you think the government is going to now clamp down on those people who are protesting to stop them from going on the streets?
What I think is, once they are going to continue receive air from outside to try to continue. They have been doing this before, and they will continue. And secondly, the vast majority of the Cuban population is ready to demonstrate in favor of the government as they have done yesterday.
Ambassador Clara Pulido, it's always a delight to have you in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.